All right, hello and welcome to Online Graphic Design and Digital Imaging with Youth Tech Inc. So we're going to go ahead and get started with project number 1, color correction. And for this, you'll need to make sure that you've already gotten to the website, photopea.com. That's photopea.com. And the website will look like this once you get here. Now, if you've ever used Adobe Photoshop before, you'll notice that this looks very similar to it. So there's a lot of key similarities between the two. So once you do get here, the first step, because again, our project today is our first one today, that is we're just going to be working with doing some color correction. So commonly in graphic design and in digital imaging, color correction just refers to editing a photo that was taken poorly. So if you take a photo and the exposure's too low, or maybe people in the photo have like red eyes, or the photo is really blue or it's really orange, it just looks a little weird. It doesn't look how it did in real life. That's when photo editors and graphic designers and digital artists, they start doing what's called color correction. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New Project, which is going to prompt this screen right here, and we'll go ahead and start off with 1280 by 720. So this looks good right here. And we'll leave the DPI as 72, and the background will be white. And then I'll go ahead and click Create. And here we go. So now I'm going to open up my file folder here. And I just grabbed a picture to use earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that in here. I've got a landscape picture. And I'm just going to drag and drop that in. And you'll notice it's loading. And I'm going to go ahead and expand this by dragging on the corners here, and I'm going to hold down Shift to make it scale with the aspect ratio. That way it doesn't get skewed. And you'll notice I'm dragging it wherein it's a little bit bigger than the actual size of the canvas here. So the canvas and the image itself are not the same aspect ratio, but that's okay because the image is very high res. So I'm going to go ahead, and now that I'm done scaling it, you hit this little check mark at the top just to confirm, kind of say, yep, you can go ahead and set that in place. So this is a fairly well taken photo. So it's the exposure is very good because you can see all of your highlights very well. So you can see the sky. The sky is a lot of where your highlights are. The land, these hills, are a lot of where your shadows are. So if you're looking at some of your dark colors, so the dark grass and the dark vegetation in the photo, that's your shadows. And again, the sky is your highlights, and then everything in between is what we call our midtones in photos. So again, this is a very well balanced photo because you can make out everything in the photo. So you're not losing any detail there. So to just start doing some edits, and again, this picture doesn't necessarily need edits, but we're gonna talk about what we would do if it did need a little bit of fixing per se. So number one, we go to images, image at the top, and then adjustments. And then we get this big ol' array of options that we can choose from on this little drop down menu right here. So the first one we're going to talk about is brightness and contrast. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, with brightness, you can make it brighter, or you can make it less bright. And then contrast, it creates more separation between the highlights and the shadows. And to do that, it basically erases the midtones. And so it makes things pop a little bit more. So you'll notice that this is the photo with a lot of contrast. This is the photo with hardly any contrast. And you can see how things are starting to blend together here. It looks a little bit more gray. and this looks very sharp, very lots of contrast. So we don't necessarily need to change the brightness of the contrast. So I'm going to hit reset and then just exit out of this window, then go back to image adjustments. We've also got levels here. So there's a couple different channels that we can choose from here. We can choose from RGB, and basically we can drag these numbers There we go. And you'll notice as I change this to the red channel, I'm starting to lose my red. So right here you can see that there's kind of a little bit of red in the picture, but then as I drag this to the right, the photo becomes more green and a little bit more blue. Now, if I were to drag this to the left, it's all of a sudden it's bringing my midtones. That makes my midtones a little bit more red. Now let's see if I can drag this back to the left. Let's try dragging our highlights over. So if I drag my highlights over, then the photo becomes very, very, very red. So it's levels is kind of the way that you can change the balance of the colors in your image pretty easily. There's a color system in graphic design that's known as RGB, which is red, green, blue, and the premise of that is that you can get every color that you'll ever see just from a different combination, a different amount of a little bit of red, a little bit of green, and a little bit of blue. And so that's kind of the theory behind levels, is that you can change the amounts of green, red, and blue here. So now I'm making it even more purple and red, but now I can balance back out the green again, but the highlights are still pretty red. So then I drag this out more, and now this is kind of more yellow now. So again, as you can see, the colors changing as I'm changing the levels. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the levels because, again, this is a decently balanced photo. So I'll go back to adjustments. This time let's talk about curves. Curves, you can take that same RGB and bend your little histogram that you see here, this little graph, at certain points. So you can bring the curve inward, which you can see how that kind of creates like a sharp contrast effect, and you can see how bringing it outward raises the exposure, makes it super bright. If we go all the way, it's basically just white, and if we go all the way in, it's nearly all black. So there's kind of different levels to it. If we do, let's go to green. If I go to green and I move things around just a little bit, you can see how it changes some of the colors based around that there. So that looks a little wacky right there. Lots of green. I hit reset again. Let's try blue. So the interesting thing here is changes in blue. I mean, they're pretty obvious here. They're probably less obvious because there's already so much blue in the photo. But you can change blue as well. Now, interestingly enough, you can take out your blue, which leaves a lot of green behind. Then we'll go ahead and hit reset, and we'll exit out of that. Then let's go to image. Let's talk about vibrance. So vibrance and saturation. So you've got vibrance, which just makes your colors basically pop more. And if you decrease it, it makes it look a lot more pale. Saturation makes the colors that you have just richer, and if you decrease your saturation, it takes away your color. So that's an example of saturation. If we go to adjustments again, this time we've got hue and saturation, which again we just worked with vibrance and saturation, but this does more particularly with different colors. So you'll notice as I drag my hue selector along here, it changes to different colors. So here's like a blue with a red. If I go back to the left here, here's like a green. And here's like the neutral kind of color, and it shifts to red, and then purple, then back to blue. And then saturation, of course, can also be edited, as can lightness. So let's go back to image and adjustments now. You can also make your color, your photo black and white. Color balance just helps you. Let's say your photo was really, really red. Well, then you can bring up your green and you can bring up your blue to balance it out. So that's your color balance. Because again, everything kind of works in that RGB system. So if one thing is out of balance, if the R is up really, really high, if it's really, really red, then to balance it out, all you do is you just bring up your green and then you bring up your blue, and then it's leveled off pretty much. So you've got your black and white. You've got your photo filter, which you can choose the density color. So if you want orange, you can increase the density here, and you'll notice that it applied that density over the image here. And then if I hit reset and quit it, it goes back to its original density. Then let's go back to adjustments again. So that was the photo filter. Then we've got the channel mixer. Again, it's this one is about mixing the different channels. So let's say you wanted a lot more red, but a lot less green, and a little bit less blue, or maybe more blue. There we go. So we've got a photo here with hardly any green at all, but with a lot of blue and a lot of red. And you can decrease the total amount of all that red as well, because again, we're in the red channel right now. But if we go to the green channel and I decrease some of the green, now it's really, really blue. So again, this is kind of the essence of color correction right here. Is it's all about striking the right balance. So if we go to invert, that basically just inverts the colors. So we had a very blue sky, so now we have a very blue ground with a very mid-tone colored sky. And we'll go back to image adjustments one more time. Posterize, it basically loses some of the details in the image. It kind of makes it look a little bit more cartoony and comic-y here, kind of something that you might see in a comic. And if we go back to image adjustments, we're almost done here. Threshold. This blows it out as well. So again, this kind of also again gives it sort of a comic or a cartoon appearance. This is kind of how sometimes when you make a copy in a copy or a printer, this is kind of how it looks. And then there's also, you've got your gradient map, which can add gradient to your image, and then selective color, and then replace color, where you can isolate a color and then replace it. And so these are all just some basics to your color correction. And again, this is just your project one, so feel free to find an image from online, or maybe one that you have. Just try it out, try changing some of the colors here, try just making it look a little bit different. And then when you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on to project number 2 for image selection and desaturation, and we will see you there.